Hi, I'm Kathy from Stitch It Together, and this video is to show you the differences between center point placement and 4-point placement. This would be for people who are using QCT, the Plus, or the Pro tier. If you are using the edge-to-edge tier, you are already using 4-point placement. My goal is not to give a tutorial for how to use center point placement or how to use 4-point placement. It's just simply to show you the differences between the two. And it is my humble opinion that 4-point placement is just a better avenue to go for getting your quilts well covered and well quilted. And hopefully this will convince you at least to try it or to know the differences between the two. So what I have on my screen right now is actually, I'm inside a pattern CAD. And what I have drawn some figures here to help me explain the differences between 4-point and center point placement. So what this is supposed to represent right here is a quilt top, if it's perfect, which we know that they're not. We know that quilts are not perfect, but if it was perfect, this would be our quilt top, and this is the center of that quilt. This is going to be representing that same quilt top, and here's the center point, but it is rolling a little crooked on the frame, as many quilts do. And so that's what this is supposed to represent. And then this quilt right here is to represent what a real quilt might look like, in that it is not perfect and it has little, bobbles and such. And right here, these are meant to represent, let me turn the nodes off so you can kind of see it better. This is to represent, and it's not very pretty, my apologies. This is a zone with a pattern inside of it. I just kind of freehand drew something. My apologies if it's a mess. But so this is supposed to represent a zone that would fit right here. When you set up your quilt, whether you're in Plus or whether you are in Pro, one of the first things you do, and I'll do that next when we go into actual pantograph, is you will set your width. And in center point placement, whatever you put as your width, it will not change no matter what you do. So if you put 40, if this quilt top is 40 inches and you make your design 40 inches, no matter what you do, it is going to be 40 inches. So it's not going to be 40 and a half. It's not going to be 41. It's not going to be 39. It's always going to be 40 inches. So if this is your quilt top and this is a center point, what you do when you are using the center point placement is it's going to work like this. You have made your design. QCT puts what's going to be in a zone. You will have marked your center point right there, and you would bring your pattern and you would place it on that very first zone, so that you're bring your needle right to the center point and it places your design. QCT is going to stitch it out. You're going to pull your bobbin and it's going to make a mark. It's going to show you where that center point is. And it's always going to assume that your quilt is perfect. Like, it's always going to assume that this is your quilt. So your center point, no matter what happens, unless you zhuzh something, your center point is always going to be the line that goes straight from here all the way down. So that when you go to place your next zone, you would just do this, right? You'd find that center point and you'd matched up your dots. And so if this was the next zone after that, you would place this one right underneath this one. And if so long as everything is perfect, there's no worries. But in real life, things happen and quilts aren't so perfect. So if this was still your quilt and you were to place this pattern, oops, undo, right here using the center point placement, and this was your quilt top, you would have some issues right here because your quilt top is imperfect and it would not cover this area right here. And now you could try and move your points a little bit this way or a little bit that way to get better coverage, but you're still going to have some areas that are not covered if your quilt is bigger. So you would stitch this all the way out, and then QCT would make a mark right here. So then when you go to place this again, you would have maybe more area that is not quite covered, and there wouldn't be anything that you could do to fix that. Now, most people that use center point placement, they will make their design bigger than your quilt top. And there's nothing wrong with that. The purpose of this is just to show you what the differences are. So, I mean, there is a way that you can fix it, and that would be it. But this is just to demonstrate the differences. And let me just show you another example. So on this quilt top, let's just say that you have the situation where your quilt is now kind of not rolling completely straight on the frame, but realize that QCT still thinks it looks like this. So your center point is always going to be right here. So when you get further down on your quilt, if you're going to place the center mark, you're going to end up with something that looks like this, where now you're not going to have coverage over here, but you do have extra over there. And you can zhuzh it, you absolutely can. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and many people do. But the point is to show you that you cannot change this width at all in center point placement. And that is how 4-point placement is very much different. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 4-point placement and center point placement, but within Pantograph now. So I'm going to come out of this screen and I'm going to go into Pantograph. And I'm just going to use resume sewing. And when you're going to see, I'm going to go in here, you're going to see some markings that I previously made. If you don't know this about QCT, so long as you don't shut anything down, you can go back and forth between different, like say, Select and Sew and Pattern CAD with your markings, and your markings will still be there. So that is how I got those markings there in advance. So I'm going to say, I'm going to resume sew so I already have a quilt that I've designed for this exercise. So I'm going to open that up. It's going to go into Zone Manager. Automatically, Zone Manager is where this option between 4-point placement and center point placement exists. So right now it's in 4-point placement. Let's just change it to center point placement for our example here. So I'm going to say OK, and we're in the first zone. I'm going to say OK. So what we have right here, my markings are to represent 3 different areas of our quilt. So this is my safe area. I made it extra big so I could have 3 different copies and I have to draw this each time for you. So this right here is to represent when you first start your quilt. This right here is your quilt top, and this is the center point. So in center point placement, we would have marked the center of our quilt, and we'd bring our needle to that center point placement, and we would bring our needle right there, and then we would tap this button. So if this was my quilt top and it's a little bit off in some places, as many quilt tops are, you can see that I wouldn't have this area covered and there wouldn't be anything that I could do about that. I could zhuzh it a little bit. The only thing that I could do would be go back into the design screen and make this bigger so that it would cover this area. But that's the only way that I could fix this. So this right here is to represent our quilt top when you roll it. So we would stitch this out. Let's sew it out. So then QCT is going to say, let's mark our zone. So it goes right to the middle. And so we would say, take a single stitch. We're going to say continue. So now we're going to zone 2. Now on this quilt, have you moved it that way? I'm going to say, okay, yes. So this is also 40 inches. That's what I've designed this at. And here's our second row. But I want you to look at these 2 dots right here. I'm going to draw a line. But what this is going to represent is a situation where if your quilt did not roll evenly on the frame. And so instead of your design being perfectly straight across the top, it's going to be a little bit angled. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to the marking tool and I'm going to add a new marking. Just call it 0, enter. So what I'm doing is I am adding a line, and this is just representing where this line of stitching is, right here, the bottom, the lowest point of this row ahead of us, so that there is stitching that runs right along here. So if I were to go and place this pattern, let's say our dot is right here that we made, our center point placement would be roughly about right there, and I were to place this pattern, you're going to see that because my stitching, well, actually it would be about right there, is not, it's not going to be correct. See, I guess if the highest point is right there, it would be about right there. You're going to see that it's going to overlap because if this is my stitching right here, it's going to overlap. Vice versa, if it was the other way, I would have some areas that would not have, that would have a gap between it because there is no way if your pattern starts to roll unevenly on your frame, which many quilts do, and there's nothing wrong with your frame if it's due. I mean, you're working with fabric and batting and things that are uneven and imperfect. And so you could have a situation where you have either stitching that's going over the top of the previous row, or you could have a gap. And there wouldn't be any way that you can change this in center point placement because it will only put this pattern straight with a horizontal line. Finally, let's go. I'm going to go to zone banner. I'm going to go to our last zone. And I'm going to show you our very last zone. This is to represent the bottom of our quilt. Let me just go to zone manager, pick it right here. I'm going to say, okay. So if this is our last zone and this was our center placement, it's supposed to be about right here. Let's place it right here and see what we got. Maybe over a little bit more. If this is the end of our quilt and this is our center point, we have it where it's extending right here, but it's not quite meeting the bottom right here. So we would either have to be happy with this not stitching out, or we'd have to go back a zone and stitch this, the zone ahead of us, and then the final zone with the partial diamonds, and just sew that little tiny weeny sliver right there. But that is what we would have to do if we use center point placement because we don't have any options. So now I want to show you the difference, what the same quilt would look like if we used 4-point placement. So let's go to Zone Manager and I'm going to say 4-point placement. I want you to notice that when we go back to the next screen, that the box in the center here that had the yellow diamond in it, let's just go into it, is going to change. See how that changed? So now we have this box. These are our controls instead of the other one. And at first, you only have an A corner. This is what we call the A corner. This is where we're going to start. Now, with center point placement, you needed to know where your center line was, but that's not the case when you're using 4-point placement. And 4-point placement, often people will use the corners of their quilt. You don't have to. I don't want to go into because it would be a little bit complicated to show you. You can make this so that it is off the sides of your quilt if you wanted to, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to use the corner of the quilt. So if this is our quilt top, now the center point doesn't matter. I don't need to know where the center point is. So I'm going to bring my needle right to the left-hand corner and I'm going to tap the A box and watch what happens here. When I tap the A corner, that's always your upper left-hand corner, just like when you have set your safe zone. Again, this is not your safe zone, but it's always a particular order. You always start at the left. That is also the case when you are doing 4-point placement. So we're starting at the left right here. And now you can see it's not quite covered, but now I want you to watch what's going to happen. So my B corner, if this was center point placement, I could not make an adjustment for this unless I raised the whole thing up. But now it's asking me to set my B corner, my second corner. I'm going to bring my needle right to the corner of the quilt and I'm going to tap the B box right here. And as you can see, it has extended the pattern just a little teeny weeny bit. So the reason it can do that is by default, let's look at these boxes right here. By default, we have these settings right here that lock your width and lock your height. Well, the beauty of A and B or 4-point placement is that you have these controls and you do not have them with center point placement. It is as if your width is locked and your height is locked. You can do nothing to change any of that. 4-point placement, you would want to leave this unchecked so that you can make some adjustments, tiny adjustments. You wouldn't want to make big ones, tiny adjustments to your width so that you can get it to fit your quilt top better. Now, lock height. Height talks about this distance right here. And by default, lock height is checked. And what this is going to allow you to do is to use some directionality. See, notice that C and D, and they also say optional. Don't think of these necessarily as moving the height or needing to know where the next zone is. Let's not think about it like that. Let's think about it more in terms of this is direction. This is going to help us direct this. And this distance is going to stay the same so that our pantograph will go together beautifully. But it also allows us to have some directionality and change the width to better fit our quilt top. Let me go back to Zone Manager so I can get the very first zone. I forgot to switch zones. So I want to go back up to our first zone right here. It's still in 4-point placement. Okay, so I'm going to replace this right here. So this is our A corner right here. I'm going to move my machine to right where the quilt top is, corner is, B. And this is looking like it's fitting pretty good. But you know what? It might not actually look like this. It might be bulbed out a little bit. It might be bowed in some areas. Quilts are flexible and they're perfectly imperfect. So what I like to do is making sure that lock height is checked. I would find the widest point of my quilt and I'm going to, like, let's say my quilt came outside of this line. Let's say it was bowed a little bit. If I tap on D, this distance is not going to change, but it's going to start directing the quilt wider at this point. So I'm going to just tap on that so you can see what it looks like. See how it's now come outside of the line without touching this line yet? So that is what this function does. Likewise, you could bring it in if you needed to. And notice that I don't have to go down. I don't need to know where your D corners are. So when we're talking about 4-point placement, if you know where A, B, C, and D need to go, you always need to know where A and B are. You can certainly do that. And there would be times where you could use these and unlock the height so that you could place A, B, C, and D exactly and precisely where you wanted. But most of the time, you're going to leave this checked so that your pantograph will fit perfectly together. So let's go back to this particular quilt, and I'm just going to bring it to where does the widest part of this line is. I was showing you an example in case it extended past that. But if this is our true quilt top, I'm going to look for the widest point, which is down here. I'm going to tap on D. And I'm going to look for the widest point over here. Let's just say maybe it's right there. Notice that even if I go to the widest point and it's not on the quilt, it will still move it. I don't need to know where C needs to be. So even if I were to go below or above it, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change this distance at all. So now I'm going to stitch it out. So instead of having a marking like you did at center point placement where when it was done, it put a mark right here, you're going to get 2 marks. You're not going to get 4 because realize it knows that the top of the row starts right here, but it could not put your C and D corners because that's beyond your sewing space. So you're only going to get 2 marks and they're going to be where the pattern goes together right here. So let's do that. So it's making a mark, next mark, single stitch. So we had the marks that were right here and right here, and we are going to go on. I'm going to say go on, and that's what this is going to represent. These 2 dots right here are going to represent the markings that we made just here. So whereas they're straight right here, when we rolled our frame, we're going to see that they're not. So when we rolled our frame, it was a little bit, it's not rolling evenly. So I'm going to say continue. Okay, so now we're back at A, and it will only allow us to set A. So again, my safe area is extra large, so we're just going to set this. This is supposed to be the same quilt, but here's our A mark right here, and I can place it. So if this was center point placement, you would see that this would be going over the stitching from the previous row. But in 4-point placement, if this is our B corner, it doesn't matter. It's going to fit together perfectly. I'm going to touch that node and QCT is going to bring this down. And so now I can go to where the widest point of this line is. And if it's up here, I could leave it right here or the narrowest part. It doesn't really matter. I can put my C and my D corners really wherever I need to get the best fit inside of the quilt top. And or you don't have to place them at all. I could leave it just like this. I would be happy with that because if this is my quilt top and it's going to the outside, I would be fine with that. So let's go ahead and sew this out. QCT is going to give us our marks. So there's one mark. There's our next mark. So now we're at our last zone, and let's go ahead and place that. So here's our A. Here's our B. That dot right there represents the B corner. But we can see that we don't have it fitting, and that is actually just a little bit too short right here. And if you were in center point placement, you would have to go back a zone. If you want it to be completely filled, you would have to go back a zone and sew this without the bottom stitching right here. And then you'd have to come and then just have a little teeny weeny stitch or section, that little sliver right there if you wanted it to get filled in, and by using the partial diamonds. But with the 4-point placement, you don't need to do that. So this would be where I would want to unlock the height, because now I'm going to make a small adjustment in the height. Now you do not want to do this for big movements. You don't, because it is going to skew this pattern. It's not going to add any more stitches to it. It's not going to add any more pattern to it. It's going to take what is already there, even with this line cut off, because this is the bottom row, and I'm going to now get it so I can fit in here just by unlocking the height. Now I can actually place my D corner and my C corner, and now it completely fits. You cannot do that when you have the center point placement. So those are the benefits. This is why I prefer to use the 4-point placement method. And I hope this gives you just a good idea of why it might be a good idea to learn 4-point placement and why it might offer you better quilting results. I am Kathy from Stitch It Together, and happy quilting.